guys, it's Emily back with another Grass River micro class. I'm really excited for today's topic. It's one of my favorites. Today we're going to be talking about scat. And you might be thinking, ew, gross, scat, that's poop. True, but you can tell a lot about an animal based on its scat. You can obviously tell what type of animal was in the area. You can tell which type of habitat the animal is using based on where you find the scat. You can obviously tell diet. And you can even, if you have access to some high tech equipment, you can even tell things like DNA and look at sort of like a genetic structure of a population. And you can also look at which types of parasites the animal might be carrying around in its gut. So obviously this is a big topic, but I want to teach you guys how to identify 4 really common types of scat that you might find in the northern Michigan woods. First up, we're talking coyote. So lucky for you guys, I brought out some rubber models of scat called Repliscat that we have in the Grass River Center that you're welcome to check out anytime we're open. So obviously this is not real. But this is a rubber model of what coyote scat looks like. About 3 to 4 inches long, about 3/4 to an inch in diameter. What this doesn't show though is the texture. So a lot of times coyote scat will have fur in it because obviously they like to eat animals. And so that makes especially one end of the coyote scat really tapered and twisted with the fur. So that's the end that comes out of the animal last, if you wanted to know that. And you can see that not on this model very well, but you can see it really well on this photo I took on the new boardwalk actually just last week. That nice tapered end. And another thing that's really typical of coyotes is that they like to deposit their scat on runways or trails that are frequently used or at trail junctions, sort of as a signpost marking their territory. So you'll often see them in these kind of obvious areas. And so we talked about coyote scat containing fur. It doesn't always. Coyotes don't always eat animals. They are actually more omnivorous than people think they are. So a lot of times they will eat fruit, berries, other types of vegetation. So their scat can look a little bit different depending on their diet. And if you're wondering what fox scat looks like, it often looks a lot like coyote scat, just smaller. So instead of 3 to 4 inches long, about 2 inches long. Instead of 3/4 to an inch in diameter, about 1/2 inch in diameter. But it will have that twisted end that's very indicative of members of the canine family. So next we're going to talk about bobcat. And believe it or not, bobcat scat actually looks very different from coyote scat. About the same length, about 4 inches, but instead of it being relatively cylindrical with a tapered end, bobcat scat actually ends up looking more like beads strung together very closely, so very segmented. So here's the Repliscat of it. You can see more of the segmentation. Both of the ends are blunt too. This doesn't show it very well, but and bobcat scat will always have fur in it because unlike coyotes, bobcats are what we call obligate carnivores. They have to eat meat. They don't eat any sort of vegetation. And another thing about bobcat scat is that bobcats are very efficient digesters. So the scat will be very hard. So if you're adventurous, you can take a stick and poke the scat and it will be very hard and very compact. Another clue you can use to see if it's bobcat scat is look for any sort of scraping in the ground around the scat, or if the scat is partially buried, because just like domestic house cats, bobcats love to bury their scat. And scientists think that that's sort of a carryover adaptation from way back in bobcats' evolutionary history when there were much larger cats roaming the landscape, and it's sort of a way for them to go undetected. They're gonna bury their stinky poop. All right, if you're ever walking through the woods and you come across a pile of scat that looks like it was made by a giant, you are looking at black bear scat. It's very hard to confuse it with any other type of wild animal. But the tricky thing about black bear scat is that because black bears have such a variable diet, they are true omnivores, they also have very variable scats. So if you're looking at a scat that looks something like this, very tubular, cylindrical, almost like a giant dog made it, that's a black bear that probably ate some sort of animal matter, either like a deer or scavenged some sort of carrion, just dead animal matter. But if you see black bear scat that looks something like this, that is indicative that that black bear was eating fruit, because when black bears eat fruit, berries, cherries, that sort of thing, their scat just becomes a liquidy mess and very dark, and you can see those cherry pits or berry seeds in the scat. But a lot of times it also looks kind of in between the two, like this scat that I found and an outlying, very far away from the trails, don't worry, part of Grass River. And you can see that it's kind of in between the two. The bear was probably eating a combination of animal matter, berries, maybe some nuts thrown in there, whatever was available at that time of year. One thing about bear scat though is it will almost always be very dark. Last but not least, I wanted to talk about raccoon scat, and unfortunately I do not have a repliscat version of raccoon scat, but suffice it to say, it's usually reddish black in color, the ends are blunt, and it's usually very granular, so it definitely has some texture to it, it's not smooth. And the best way to kind of get an idea if it's raccoon scat that you're looking at though is how you find it. You often find it in what are called latrines, and those are basically just like group toilet sites that a raccoon family will use over an extended period of time. So you almost never find just one raccoon scat. You often find a lot of them all together in a group of varying ages. And these will often be at the base of a tree, and a crotch in a tree, or even on a raised area nearby trees. And I wanted to end on raccoon scat because, sort of as a cautionary note, because raccoon scat can actually contain roundworm eggs, which humans can inhale if they get too close to raccoon scat. I shouldn't have to tell you not to take a big whiff of scat, but don't, because roundworm eggs can actually cause some pretty serious health issues for humans, like problems with your brain and heart and eyes. So be careful with scat. It's really fun to look for and try to identify it, but just don't get super close. All right. That's all I have for you guys today. Let me know if you have any questions. Get out there and look for some scat, and I'll see you next week. Bye.